So we know from study after study has shown that the single most important factor in student achievement is the kind of teacher that they have in the classroom in front of them. That trumps socioeconomic status and family background, and it's something that pretty much everybody can agree on. But with this topic, that's where a lot of the agreement ends, and there are widely different views on how to get to that goal. The title of this panel is How to Build a Better Teacher, but we're also going to talk about how to keep those better teachers in the profession once we get them. And that's a challenge that is growing higher by the day as we look forward to the pending retirement of a generation of baby boomer teachers in the next decade, as well as the state's shortage of teachers in high-need areas like math, science, and bilingual education. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and kick it off. Dr. Paige, through your work at Houston ISD, as well as implementing the No Child Left Behind Act, you've dealt a lot with what it means to be a highly qualified teacher. So in your eyes, I mean, just what does it mean? What is the defining characteristic of a highly qualified teacher?
First, I would suspect that the first thing I would look for in a highly qualified teacher is a person who loved children, who really cared about their progress, and who was willing to move in that direction, and to set aside ideologies and other things that would impede the progress a student would make, but to go directly at improving the student's progress. So it goes about a teacher who can transfer to the student the fact that they care about them and they really want them to learn. That's the first thing I would look for.
And how do we design a system that can measure that so that we can identify those top teachers?
Well, designing a system that would measure that is going to be really complicated. The real measure is the outcome on the end. Did the child learn? And that's where we have a lot of conflict about how do we measure that. And if we could find ways to measure better than standardized tests, then I'd be all for that. But right now, properly controlled and properly administered, properly advised, standardized programs for assessment would be the way I'd go about that.
Professor McNeil, have you, in your research, have you found better ways to measure than standardized tests, and what would that look like?
Actually, a standardized measure is the worst thing you can do. It basically tells us nothing except how a child does on a particular test. If we're serious about teachers, that relational piece that Dr. Paige talked about, caring about kids, but also bringing a really rich knowledge base of their subject, of children's learning, and of the cultures of the children and their family, then we need a really well-educated, well-trained person. Right now, our system is structured so that it's very inhospitable to teachers with a really complex knowledge base. If they're supposed to get their kids through to a standardized test that is generic across masses of kids in schools and is designed and scored by people very far from the classroom, often with no training whatsoever, that tends to fragment the knowledge. It's generic, it's not about their kids. So I think measure is the wrong word. The very first thing we need is structures that really support, invite, retain, and further develop those teachers with that really rich, complex knowledge base. And then most of the really good assessments of classroom practice and teaching are grounded in the subject fields. The National Council of Teachers of English has a very long and rich history and deep reservoir of ways we look for really good writing instruction, really good literary interpretation, really good language development. The same in the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Once we step out of the disciplines and away from the children and child development and into this generic zone, we're pretty much, and now we have almost 20 years of data to show, dumbing down the curriculum, making our school systems inhospitable places for really knowledgeable people to come and stay. We have de-skilled the profession, and then now we see the data in Texas coming out that we're among the very lowest tier of states, even in what we pay. So we've created disincentives, both financial and structural, for really good teachers to come into our system. So it's not about building a better teacher. I don't know too many teachers that would think that was a very positive way of saying it. It's about creating structures that really are hospitable to our very best teachers along multiple dimensions, and then getting really smart about how we evaluate teacher practice and how we evaluate children's learning along multiple dimensions.
And Ms. Beard, through Teach for America, you deal almost exclusively with bringing in new teachers into schools, bringing in people into the profession. What have you seen works as far as that's concerned, and what do you see needs to be improved about making sure that those young people want to stay and continue to be educators?
Yep. Well, first, it's great to be here this morning. And this conversation is very personal for me as someone who grew up in South Texas in McAllen, who comes from a home where my mother is from Mexico, and my mother knew when she came to the United States that education was the pathway for her children, and was going to marry someone who had the same values. And my dad is a first-generation college graduate whose family is also from Mexico. And as someone who did very well in high school, went through traditional public schools in my hometown of McAllen, ended up at a rigorous university, small liberal arts college, and still felt underprepared for the task ahead of me. And so and thankfully had the supports and had learned the discipline and focus and all that my parents had taught me on how to succeed, where I've ended up, and had a good trajectory as a former teacher, and now have committed my life to working at Teach for America. I mean, what I would say about what's working, our young kids that apply to Teach for America have signed up to make an impact, have decided that they want to be a part of something that is critically important, and many see this as our civil rights issue of today. The fact that kids growing up in low-income communities do not have the same access and opportunity as their more privileged peers. We all know the statistics, right? Kids growing up in low-income communities have an 8% chance of getting 8% of them, have a college degree by the age of 24, compared to their more affluent peers, where 80% have a college degree. And as Americans, no matter what your beliefs are, we all really believe that every kid ought to have the access and opportunity to succeed in America. And so our young teachers are coming in saying, I believe in that, and I'm going to do whatever it's going to take, go above and beyond the call of duty to deliver on that charge, which means academics, but also I fully agree, it's creating a well-rounded student that understands what it's going to take for them to succeed in our system, and then are committed for life because they go on to understand the opportunities and the challenges and the very multi-dimensioned issues facing kids growing up in poverty and what it's going to take to change that. And so our young people go on to be fierce advocates for kids growing up in low-income communities, whether it's stay in education or go outside of education.
One of the things that I believe TFA has struggled with is that while we do have this kind of core of really talented young people going into the profession, most of them don't tend to stay there after they reach 4 or 5 years. You see a very high turnover rate. Does that indicate to you that there's something else in the system that needs to change in order to keep those teachers there?
Yes, we have. So 5 out of 6 folks that join Teach for America on the outset say, I would not be going into education if it were not for Teach for America. And we actually have 67% end up staying in education, 50% of which are actually still in the classroom. And I mean, what I would point to is, I don't know if you all are familiar with the study, The Irreplaceables, that TNTP put out, but I think it was an important study, I think, that says, it studied something like 90,000 teachers in 4 urban districts, 2,100 schools, and it was trying to figure out what are the irreplaceables, those teachers that are making extraordinary progress academically with their kids, and these irreplaceables are making something like 5 or 6 months more progress than the lowest performing teachers in a classroom. Yet they are being retained at the exact same level and rate as low performing teachers. And as you sort of study this, even the irreplaceable teachers, where it'll take they're very difficult to replace. You'll have to find 11 teachers before you find this type of teacher in a school, are feeling devalued, are feeling not cared about, ignored, et cetera. And so I think we really need to start thinking about how do we create conditions in a school? And I think the focus on school leadership as well. My personal view is that if you have a great school leader that is really paying attention and has clear vision and direction and clear accountability for what they're trying to accomplish and brings our teachers along and engages them in, you know, professional development that really matters, that really plays a role in this, and that we ought to start thinking about, you know, an irreplaceable teacher versus one that is not making progress with kids in the classroom every year should not be treated the same. And I think teachers, highly effective ones. I have 2 sisters. One's been teaching for 16 years, the other for 9 years. They did not come through Teach for America. One's a traditional teacher, the other one an alt-cert teacher. And, you know, one of my youngest sister that's been teaching for 9 years is considering leaving the profession and becoming a counselor. And the reason for it is she's sort of tired of like the lack of accountability. She looks around and she's just like, gosh, it's not rigorous, and I want to be somewhere where I'm challenged. And I just think your teachers that, I believe all teachers want to do really well and enter this profession wanting to be challenged, and I think we just got to create a culture by which that is happening, and holding accountable our school leaders as well.
And Ms. Fallon, you have worked with and contact with a lot of teachers that work in HISD, and that's a district that has tried to tackle some of the issues that Ms. Beard referred. It has implemented several reforms, including under Dr. Paige's leadership, and it's currently in the midst of rolling out a new teacher appraisal system. What have you observed from your time there about working conditions and what the best ways to address them for teachers?
Well, I can tell you that probably one of the most demoralizing things we have is the new teacher evaluation system. You know, there are a series of management studies that have been done that talk about how you enact change, and all of them seem to agree on one thing. You don't take it from the top down and force it on people. When you do, what you get is compliance, not acceptance, just compliance, and very often a lot of resentment. And that's what we're seeing. Now, HISD will tell you when they did their new assessment, they involved the shared decision-making committees, the district advisory committee, just like the state law says they had to do. The problem is, we had a number of people on those committees, and we talked to a number of parents on the committees. And what they told us was that the new teacher project came in with exactly what they knew they were going to do, and then they imposed it. And like one of the issues was the amount that the test counted. And the people who opposed it even more than the teachers were the parents, because they're really tired of the very narrow curriculum that test score accountability has created. So the next meeting, when they came back, no change. It was just, okay, we heard you, moving on. That's not real input, and it certainly isn't decision making. And what it has done is, we asked when they put it in, pilot it. You know, I wouldn't take something brand new and roll it out in 270 schools. As near as we can tell this year, we have 270 different approaches to the assessment because there hasn't been sufficient training. We just did a survey of our members as far as attitudes out there toward it, and, well, actually, we did a survey of everyone. We didn't limit this one to the members. It was an internet survey, and we even included the principals. The first question was, do you consider the new teacher assessment to be fair and objective? 6% said yes. I mean, to me, that was appalling. I expected a split, but not at that level. What we are seeing that we've also never seen before is, because there hasn't really been sufficient training, there hasn't been sufficient understanding, and some of the language is very vague. And that was one of the things the state assessment got us away from. In the state assessment, you had to go in and observe the behavior. It got away from the I think, I feel, and I don't really like you. this one goes right back to every error that we had prior to adopting the state assessment, particularly in the professional area. It's kind of like, oh, you don't want to come in on Saturday and do tutorials for free because you have 3 kids at home? I guess you're not very professional. I'm going to grade you down. Or I'm going to come in and watch, but I don't have to be there for the full 45 minutes of a lesson cycle. I only have to be there for 30 minutes. I got in 15 minutes late, but I didn't see you do an introduction. So I'm going to grade you down. Now, as far as the impact on morale, in the past, we didn't see many teachers walk out mid-year. If they left mid-year, it was either retirement when they hit that 50% plus 1 day and could get a year's credit, illness, transfer, but very few. Since August 1, we've had 485 teachers leave HISD, and they're not all retirements. In fact, a good number of them are probationary teachers. And when we talk to them, we tell them there's a penalty. You know, you're going to get listed as a termination. You're going to have to put that on your application everywhere you go from now on when they say, have you ever been terminated? And they're going to take your certificate. And it'll have a permanent sanction. And what I get back is, I don't care. It's not worth my mental health. I had another one tell me, I can't keep walking into a place I dread. What is happening is they're feeling that they can't teach. They can't interact with the kids. They can't do all the things that used to make teaching fun. So you're losing them at both ends. You're losing the new ones, and those who can retire are doing it.
So part of the goal of implementing these systems is to be able to identify the quality teachers, to be able to reward them, as well as find the ones who need improvement to be able to get professional development to them. And it's something that deals with, you know, very sensitive issues like salary and employment terms. So, I mean, one might expect that if a district is trying to implement these kinds of reforms, that there would be a lot of controversy. But Dr. Paige, I mean, have you seen, in your experience, is there a way for a district to navigate this, or for a state, for that matter, to navigate this in a way that brings in more buy-in from the community?
I think it's definitely a way. Let me make this point. Many of the questions that we're addressing right now have been addressed in the Texas Teaching Commission report. That a group of gentlemen and ladies spent a year studying this issue under the able leadership of Mike Moses and Jim Nelson. And so I ask each of you who are concerned about this to read their report. The critical issue here that we're going to have to solve is the extent to which teachers, and I'm talking about all the people in the school, and policymakers, the people outside the school who want to help, can join together and come and get some kind of consensus around the issue of what is effective assessment. I don't believe there's any teacher who really cares about children who does not want the child to be measured to determine the extent to which they have learned or not learned, so that they can target their instruction. So whether this is standardized or teacher-made or however that is, that can be determined. But the point is, if the main point is for the child to learn, it's, I think, idiotic to feel that you can do that without measuring. Measuring is a necessary condition. The question now is, how do you do that effectively? Now, how do you do that in a way that everybody is treated fairly? We want teachers to be treated fairly. In fact, I believe that we could go a long ways now to bring teachers into the discussion that policymakers and elite think tank members and other people who are discussing it are at the table, and teachers are too little at the table. And this means that these policies don't benefit from the realities of what's taking place in the schools. They understand the research, they understand the literature, they understand all of that, but there's a different reality inside the school. The gap between practitioners and policymakers must be closed if we're going to solve this issue. Now, whether or not we should have massive assessment or whether or not we should have very little assessment, the point is we got to find a way to what is appropriate, because we got to know what the child has learned or not learned. Otherwise, you can't target your instruction.
And one of the things that the Teaching Commission report did was give policy recommendations that were both at the state and district level, because so many of these decisions do take place at the district level. Does that point to the fact that there is this dissatisfaction? Does that point to a disconnect between educators and the pressures that administrators are putting on them in response to the state, or how does that all fall out?
Well, let me comment on that.
Yeah.
The most critical issue that we're facing right now, we're talking about teacher quality, which would involve their capabilities, which we're working on, but it also involves their attitude. And just last week, I think there was an article in Education Week talking about the morale is plummeting. It's the lowest it's been in 20 years. And that cannot continue to exist if we're going to solve this problem. Because if and when schools change, they will do so as a result of the people inside the school. People outside the school can be helpful, and they can offer resources, they can offer suggestions, they can offer research. But the bottom line is, if you don't have enthusiastic efforts from the people inside the school, what you get is efforts towards compliance, which is completely different from effort towards making a big difference in the life of the children.
So it sounds like you and Ms. Fallon agree on some points here.
Well, we've often agreed. But we've also often disagreed.
Right. We just do it in a civil manner.
Yeah, we do.
Well, Professor McNeil, what are some of the things that, are there small things that districts can start out with, that state policymakers can start out with to help improve these working conditions that are affecting educators' morale?
There are a number of very specific things, and I see some of my colleagues here, and I know in the other room. We have spent, since 1988, we founded the Center for Education, and I see the director of one of our science teacher programs here. We have worked alongside teachers and standing with in the teaching of writing, early childhood, language development, the sciences, math. There are many, many ways to develop teachers' knowledge and really create a culture of strong learning that is child-centered, that is also based on the cultures of the children. That is not a problem. That is a silent area right now in policy from Washington, sad to say, and in Texas. And I think the focus on micro-measurement rather than on that teacher as an asset is just a tiny part of the problem. A bigger part of the problem is the system we've set up. For those of you that don't know, IDRA has been documenting our losses of kids. We've lost 3.2 million kids from Texas high schools in the last 20 years because of our failure to invest. We have a federal court case saying we're underfunded and unequal. Of the 2 million children added to the U.S. population in the last decade, half are in Texas. And the stats I prepped last night say that we now have 270,000 school-age kids added just over the last, I think, about 3 years, while we had already lost about 3,000 teachers before we lost the 10,000 of the budget cuts. So when we think about the work of teachers, the extreme poverty in our communities, the lack of health care, teachers and parents have to be partners with the larger community, the larger society. And I stepped in for the last 2/3 of our previous session, and I heard words like innovate. I heard words, and I thought that would be good. But the very people sitting on the stage in the session before us said, but we don't have any money for that. We can't find money for that. We will not find money for that. When you're in a context where every single day you are teaching anywhere from 22 to 200 kids, depending on if you're elementary or high school, and you see a community and a state not investing in families, not a fair and living wage, no health insurance, and that's not an excuse for what you're doing, that's just saying it makes the school even more important, and then guess what? The legislature said, sorry, money's not an answer. So yes, there are wonderful things we can do close up and personal, and there are a lot of us at Rice and in the broader community doing that. And I see some people here who funded our work and some people who are doing it. So those things in the subject fields in early childhood, but when you have a generic curriculum, we have our school districts and our state paying literally $1 billion between Pearson testing and all the ancillary district level costs. We have a lot of the people who've been setting up these policies now working for private companies that our tax dollars go to, I don't know, tutor kids or scripted curricula or whatever. It's a very hostile environment for our most dedicated teachers. And we want, whether it's the young teachers coming in or the more experienced ones, to feel they are this linchpin of a democratic community. And right now, this conversation can't take place without talking about the assets the children and their families bring and the deficits that we are creating in our state. People nationally tell me Texas is not even relevant in terms of thinking in education these days because it's seen as going so far backwards. That's not innovation, it's not leadership. So I wish the people using those words would have a little more imagination on behalf of our children, because right now it's a very hostile place to be a kid, and it's an inhospitable place to be a good teacher.
Dr. McNeil, there are certainly ways we can improve in Texas, but Texas is a leader in many aspects of education thought reform.
Would you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Dr. Paige?
Well, all we've got to do is read the NAEP scores that just came out recently, and you can see the progress, especially in 8th grade, especially in math. Texas is, I think, doing quite well. There are a lot of ways we can improve in Texas. I don't want to say that it's time to fly the flag of victory, but I think that we've been very blessed to have really strong leadership in education in Texas over the years, with succession of different governors and different legislative sets, but we can still improve, but we shouldn't take the attitude that Texas is the pits.
I would agree that we should acknowledge the progress. I was just reading an article in the New York Times on how Latinos are doing, and California is in very bad shape. But as you look at just that population of kids, what I would say is we are making progress, but in my view, it's quite incremental as well. And so, although we should acknowledge the progress and the hard work of everyone that's been at this and wants to, ensure that every kid gets the education they deserve. I also, I want us to be uncomfortable and acknowledge the very real challenges in our schools at the moment. That's going to require real leadership, honestly, and courage for us to decide what is really going to put our kids on a different trajectory. I mean, you're talking about the growing population, Dr. McNeil, which is exactly right, and it's mostly our Latino children, and they are amongst the lowest performing children in our state and then across the country, and the economic viability of our nation is in real jeopardy if we don't wake up and decide that we are going to pay the attention and take the steps, the bold steps, in my view, that will require innovation to make the progress necessary.
Ms. Fallon, I'll let you have the last word here, and then we'll open it up for questions if anyone in the audience wants to start lining up.
Texas has made some progress in their schools. However, I think one of the problems is it's been piecemeal. It's let's concentrate on this area. Let's look at student performance. Okay, we can look at student performance. We just can't agree how to measure it. Let's look at the teachers. We actually were hoping no one would go there, because when the legislature obsesses on one area, they're miserable. What has happened is, I hear the rhetoric all the time about we will fix our schools by getting an effective teacher in every classroom. And my guess is that we could go around this room and wouldn't get consensus on the characteristics of an effective teacher. And before you measure something, you kind of have to know what you're looking for. I mean, we've watched them in HISD talk about, we're going to put an effective teacher in every classroom. I sat there in consultation one time and asked them, would you give me the characteristics so we can put together training programs for our members? I haven't seen a silence that long since Rick Perry. And finally, the head of HR looked over and said, someone that can get them to pass a test. And I said, okay, with that remark, I may never want to see a child in my family in a public school if that's all you want out of the child. I want to see them trained to be a good citizen. I want to see teachers evaluated on the relevant things. Probably the most relevant thing you could look at is communication skills. Can that teacher have a sufficient knowledge of the subject they're teaching and communicate it on the level of, say, the third grade class they've got? Because if they can't, then nothing else really matters. Can they hold the attention of the students? And I have read there are measures that you can do when you go in and assess of how involved the students are. You know, one of the things we're doing right now is we are boring our students to distraction while we try to measure teacher effectiveness. We get an awful lot of students who drop out and then go take the GED because they're bored and they realize, I'll take the GED, I'll go to a year of community college, I'll transfer, and then I don't have to suffer here all day through a year of test prep.
Well, I want to make sure I open it up to questions from the audience if there are any out there. We'll go over here first.
I'm Karen Miller, and I live in Cypress Fairbanks. And I guess I first want to say it's a wonderful district. The demographics very much reflect the state in terms of student demographics and property wealth. I will share that I am pleased that we recruit and work with students in college to find our own teachers. We do not use Teach for America because I think some of the research that is out there shows, and peer-reviewed research, one by Julian Vasquez-Heilig calling Teach for America a false promise. A study done by the legislature indicated not much difference in the performance of students from Teach for America or new college graduates who were certified teachers. So I want to share that, but what concerns me very much is the punitive nature of No Child Left Behind. And I don't know what Dr. Paige would recommend, because I think there's been a lot of demoralization among teachers where students are taught to take a particular test and so much test prep that there is little time for innovation in the classroom. And I'm wondering what he would recommend after, you know, is this working out in a sense as he had planned?
So I'll just repeat the question for the folks in the back who can't hear it. The question is for Dr. Paige about what he would recommend post No Child Left Behind and whether it is working out as he planned.
I'd like to comment as well.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to agree with you that Sapphire is a wonderful school district. Like other school districts, there are areas in need of improvement, but it is a great school district. I would agree with it. Secondly, I'd like to disagree with you about Teach for America. Teach for America is a wonderful organization. It brings a lot of missionary zeal into the classrooms. And to give you an example, that when I was superintendent of schools in Houston, we had 13 geographical districts, each headed by a district superintendent. Each of those geographical districts chose a teacher of the year from the teachers inside the school district, inside those districts. One year of the 13 geographical districts, at least 6 of them chose Teach for America students as the teacher of the year. And there were only 200 Teach for America students in our system at that time, with about 13,500 other teachers. So there's some research that you can go out and pick and find some scholars about Teach for America. But in general, and watching it up close, it's a wonderful school district.
So, I'll let Ms. Beard address the Teach for America question, but did you want to, just in the interest of time, did you want to respond to the question, is the No Child Left Behind Act, is that working out as you envisioned it to?
I think the No Child Left Behind Act was a necessary condition at the time the act was enacted. There's a lot of things that we can do to improve the act. Many people don't take into consideration that when this act was put on the table to be discussed in Congress, before we get it done real well, Congress goes out for a 1-month recess in August. When Congress comes back, it is September. And all the world knows what happened in September. And so that blew the whole discussion off the table. And after we got the Congress back together to discuss this, someone put anthrax in the Senate office building, so we couldn't find the senators. Finally, there was enough agreement on some of the things to enact the law with the clear understanding that there was going to be improvement of the law as it goes forward. So I think it was one of the most important pieces of legislation that the Congress has enacted in a long time. Could it use further discussion? Of course. Are there things that could improve it? Of course. But it shouldn't be abandoned because it made some essential points, and I think it changed the culture in education in the United States of America, which was needed.
Ms. Beard, I'll let you briefly, and then I want to make sure we get to the other questioners.
I will be very brief. First, I want to say I'm so glad that you all are able to, find the teachers for your district. Our belief is, frankly, that just every principal should have choices, and we are part of one of many pipelines that schools, principals, and districts consider. And in fact, 88% of our principals that hire teachers would say I would hire one, no question, the next year. And we also do have third-party studies that in North Carolina, Louisiana, and Tennessee that show Teach for America's top performing alt-cert program, if you will. But what I do want to say, to me, the most important point here is that the promise of Teach for America is that we are recruiting young future leaders, diverse leaders that would otherwise not be in education, who are learning about the opportunities and challenges in low-income communities and becoming fierce advocates. We believe deeply teachers should stay in education. They should stay teaching, but we also believe this is a systemic problem and that we need great leaders running schools, running systems, and frankly in every position of leadership in our country. And for me, the way I think about this, I think, we need policy leaders who have taught in low-income communities, not just anywhere, but in low-income communities. What kind of decisions would we be making if people have the experience of actually teaching? And the promise of Teach for America is that what emerges from that are commissioners of education like Kevin Huffman in Tennessee, who are leading extraordinary work, John White in Louisiana, Kaya Henderson, Chancellor of DC Public Schools, and for me, or just to make sure folks understand, that is the promise of Teach for America, as a force of leaders serving our country for kids growing up in poverty.
Okay, question over here.
Hi, my name is Jason Hammock. I'm a teacher in Sugar Land, Texas, and I also taught in HISD, been teaching for 13 years. My question is, we speak a lot about rigor, increasing the rigor in schools. Rigor meaning depth and complexity as teaching in the classroom. Multiple choice tests can only measure 2 levels out of 4 as far as the levels of depth and complexity. So isn't focusing on success as measured by standardized tests limiting the rigor and depth and complexity in the classroom? In effect, testing promotes lower level, less rigorous teaching along with selective teaching on top of that.
So the question is focusing on standardized tests limiting the rigor of instruction in the classroom?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It very definitely is. You also have a generation of students who, when they get to college, what we're hearing back from some of the professors, they can't write. I mean, no one's ever given them a question that says, would you please analyze the causative factors and apply them to the following problem? I mean, as I taught for 12 years in my life, I never gave a multiple choice test because I didn't think it really measured the depth of knowledge. And we hear the same thing consistently from our members that, I don't have time to teach them to write. I'm too busy teaching them to memorize.
We have seen a real decline in the content, in kids' ability to connect ideas. If you've ever seen any of these test prep materials that our districts buy or any of the scripted curriculum, they're just totally random. You might have a reading comprehensive thing on penguins, read 3 paragraphs, find the keyword, answer the multiple choice. The next one might be on the color blue, and the next one might be on what's the Baker Institute. They're just random things. And our colleague Angela Valenzuela, who used to be here at Rice, now at UT, coined the phrase building a cumulative deficit. when I first started studying this in classrooms, I watched teachers have to dump their multidisciplinary lesson on the environment that included water quality, biology, cell theory, whatever, habitat, because those things weren't sequenced in the unit the way they were on a multiple choice test. So I was really focusing on what happened in a specific class. And then as we started really looking, what does it mean to be from first grade on through high school in a multiple choice system? And she talked about it builds a cumulative deficit. It gets us farther and farther away. So Texas scores on the ACT, the SAT, our kids do not do well. And this preceded No Child Left Behind just when the accountability system was started here, and it hasn't really budged. So what you're talking about is the concern of every excellent teacher, and we need to be their advocates. Yeah, we need to talk about what the teachers are doing, but every one of us should call the legislature this afternoon and say, we're not afraid to restore those budget cuts. We're not afraid to bring 10,000 teachers back into the classroom. You know, this is Texas, this is Houston. We're going to step up, we can do this. And so what you're talking about is one of the things driving teachers out, because they know it's unethical to base any decisions about a child, whether it's grade promotion, graduation, grade retention, on the basis of a single indicator. So we're actually requiring our teachers and principals to violate their professional ethics as well as their intellectual vision for their children.
Okay, question over here.
Hi, good morning. I'm with Parents for Public Schools of Houston. And first of all, I would like to say that the No Child Left Behind Act gave every child the ability to know that they were supposed to be valued. It was excellent, and it should have been passed a very long time ago. Thank you very much. And I would also like to tell you that, yes, it is a rigorous curriculum, but the STAR test is testing rigor where many children have not yet received the curriculum. And that is the problem. And our question is, when do you remediate? When do you get the child that starts at 10,000 words less at kindergarten and close the gap? And what are teachers doing other than, Ms. Fallon, you gave us information about the curriculum that's online for teachers, and you made it available to some of us parents, thank you, but what else is being done?
So the question is, what is being done to remediate the students that need to be brought up to curriculum levels?
Well, you just made a wonderful speech on behalf of Universal Pre-K, so that's a nice message to give to the legislature, because we start with where every child is, whether it's the university level or younger, and many of our children, maybe they have an English language deficit, but maybe they're a part of a family that courageously came here from another country. Maybe they have other kinds, not just maybe, they do have other kinds of personal strength and assets. And I think by using this one-dimensional measurement system, we miss the assets that the families bring. That so we have some middle-class kids who need to learn other kinds of things, and we may have some high-poverty kids or recent immigrant kids who needed a different attention from us. So having a system that allows us to really start with the child, I think, allows that to happen all the way up.
But that doesn't address the problem where you already have children that are within the system and also need remediation at middle school or even at the high school level because they're 2 years behind. What are we going to do about that? Where's the equity and quality in education?
You really sit down as a faculty and look at this child and say, this kid really is understanding math, but but can't really put words on paper. And we don't give them multiple choice tutoring to pass a test. We sit down and say, what kind of writing do they, I mean, this is what the profession does. This is what our subject fields do. It's what teachers haven't really been able to do so much while they're trying to march everybody through a standard thing. But that is what teacher practice is. So we actually know how to do that.
And I do think we ought to be studying the whole schools. I mean, hundreds of schools in America today that are taking kids from low-income communities who are traditionally performing behind their more affluent peers and getting them on a track to get to and through college and at higher levels than any other systems. And there are both traditional and charter schools, public schools that are doing this. And I just think we should be studying that and figuring out what is working, what are we comfortable with, and learning the lessons across the board so that we're accelerating the pace of change and all sitting at one table, putting our differences aside and learning from each other to make the most progress for our children.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions, so I apologize to those of you that have been waiting, and we won't get to, but go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you, panel. I've really enjoyed hearing your comments, and one of the things that I think I heard you all say is it's the adults that impact the teachers, the students, and it's the teacher. So I recently had an opportunity to attend a superintendent's academy. I've been in education for a very long time with HISD, Houston ISD, and now with the charter school. Thank you for mentioning charter schools. And we've been successful because the adults do pay attention to the kids. So I think this is the perfect group to address my question. When I was in this superintendent's academy, it was in the Northeast, and I think we've talked a lot about Texas, and I think there's something about Texas that we forget because we are here, and these 2 people on this side of the end will probably want to address this. Dr. Paige has written a book about it, but what really hit home to me is the unions. The people I were with were from across the states. And I was so glad to be in Texas because what I've learned up there is they have something to deal with the pressure of the unions and how hard it is to get rid of those people who aren't doing right for kids. And what I always knew when I was in a classroom or was an administrator with the district or now it's a charter school is we're doing wrong if we don't deal with the administrators and the teachers who aren't doing right by kids. And that seems to be a central theme to giving kids the best education. So I would love, and you kind of addressed it up there when you talked about the demoralization of the teacher who's working really hard next door to the teacher who may not be. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because that to me seems central to giving our kids the best education that they could have.
Well, first of all, if you look at the states that rank the highest, they tend to be the most unionized as far as their teachers. So there's a little fallacy in that. The other thing that always amuses me is when I hear it's all the union's fault you can't get rid of a bad teacher. We hear that in HISD. I always wonder, particularly in HISD, the first 3 years they exist, all you got to do is write a letter saying in the best interest of the district, we're not employing you any longer, and you're gone. There's no appeal beyond the board. You're not going to go to court. And most of your union contracts in the Northeast, I'm particularly familiar with the Philadelphia contract because that was home, most of those have that same clause in the probationary period. All the contracts do is mandate you give them a hearing. That doesn't mean that you can't fire a teacher. It means you have to have a reason once they get off of probation. And I don't think that's unreasonable. That just means, okay, go in. I went into your class and there were 5 kids asleep in the back. And you were playing games on the computer. You know, okay, you've documented it, you've called them in, you've told them what's wrong. I remember Shirley Neely used to sit there and
I'm going to interrupt and let Dr. Paige respond, get one last question in so we can just stay on
well,
schedule.
There's one thing I want to point out, though, that Neely said. She could fire any teacher in 4 memos as a superintendent, and she's absolutely right.
Dr. Paige, did you want to
Well, I
have
think
anything to add?
my point of view on unions is well known. So I don't have to comment on that.
You're not going to give us a headline?
Unions differ in their potency to retard school reform. There are many places where the problem is much stronger than others. I was fortunate to have a union leader that I could discuss with. We fought a lot, but she did okay.
And we enjoyed the fight.
Okay, last question, and we'll have to make it quick.
Okay, I'm Louis Malfaro. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Texas American Federation of Teachers, so maybe it was appropriate that we end hearing from a union guy. So I have to challenge our moderator on one of the first statements she made, which is that teacher quality trumps other factors like socioeconomic status of students and family background. I think teacher quality is amazingly important. It's one of the most important in-school factors, but make no mistake about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, University Professor McNeil, but the biggest predictor of how kids are going to do in school, unfortunately, still in this country, is their economic background. Now, that said, I spent a year with Dr. Paige and with Elisa on the Texas Teaching Commission and resigned from the commission, as did the representatives of all 4 of the teacher organizations in the state, because at the end of the day, the commission insisted that the evaluation of teachers be more focused on measuring using student test scores and less focused on support, development, and retention of teachers. Now, I'm aware of a lot of programs around the country that are successful because they focus on intensive support and development of teachers. You Teach at the University of Texas, which is now spread to 15 different campuses. The Boston Teacher Residency Program, where teachers go through a rigorous 1-year residency before they are turned loose as the teacher of record. Places like Hillsborough, Pittsburgh, and Austin, all where the union partnered with the school administration to develop robust systems not only of measuring how teachers are doing in the classroom, but supporting and training them. So I'd like to challenge the panel to point to me to one sort and select system in this country or in any other country that's leading to higher student achievement just by picking out the teachers who are the I forget what you call them, Elisa, the irreplaceables, and just focusing on them and pushing everybody else out.
I'll start. So first, just to clarify, my understanding of the report did not actually put a focus on evaluation. We actually spent the year talking about recruitment, selection, induction, ongoing support of teachers, and evaluation was a piece of that. And our discussion, in my personal view, is that evaluation, as Dr. Paige said, is a necessary part of the calculation, but we also had a very dynamic and nuanced conversation about the fact that the evaluation has to be more than just a test, and I don't think anyone up here is arguing that that is the solution here, but that instead we do have to have a robust evaluation system that includes observation and parent input and student input and, you know, survey of schools, and whether you want to do it with teams or whatever, I don't care. I think principals and districts ought to decide based on their context what's most important and what works for them. But I cannot support the statement, or I cannot support or give you an example of, you know, the case where evaluation is the thing, or teacher testing. I think it's one part of a broad you know, thing that has to be considered. And just to be clear, my also view is our country demands that our kids do well on standardized tests, just so that we're all grounded in that. I mean, our kids have to take the ACT and the ACT to go to college. And kids in low-income communities traditionally don't do well there. And so I just think we all have to stay grounded in the realities of what it means to succeed in America or have the most economic opportunity if you want to have access to a college degree. So it is part of the calculation. But I'm not going to argue it. I haven't heard anyone up here argue that that is the whole of anything.
So unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave it right there because we've gone a little over time. But I want to thank my panelists for being up here with me, and for all the members of the audience. I really appreciate it.
You did a good job.